We say all praises be to the Creator, all power to His people. In the name of Yahshua, the Black Revolutionary Messiah, I greet you, my brothers and sisters, in the spirit of truth and the words of peace. Shalom Aleichem. My name is Minister Paul Scott, and tonight on the Black Talmidim Takeover, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic. Tonight on the Black Talmidim Takeover on the Main Source Network. The Main Source Network. We're going to be talking about an issue that's very controversial called how the European, or how the white man, uses the God complex to control the entire planet and to enslave Africa, especially African people. So we're calling this one the God complex versus black liberation. The God complex versus black liberation. So we have on the line tonight members of the Black Talmidim, and they're going to be joining in a few minutes. We have Brother Uriah, who is the Deputy Minister of Culture. We have Brother Cedric, who is the Minister of Culture. And we have Brother Michael, who is the Minister of Information for the Black Talmidim. So we're looking forward to a very exciting program tonight, and we're going to be dropping a lot of information, so be sure to get your pen and paper ready, because we're going to, as always, the Black Talmidim, we're going to be dropping a lot of information. So kicking it off tonight right with the subject, how in the world could a minority of the planet, the Europeans, a minority, an insignificant minority, a latecomer to the planet, how could they possibly use religion to conquer the whole world? And the religion that they primarily used was their version of Christianity. They were able to subdue the whole planet with a picture of a white Jesus. So tonight we're going to explore how they were able to do that and how the ramifications of how they did it 500 years ago, how that's still affecting African people today. So without further ado, I'm going to bring the panel online tonight, and we're looking forward to a powerful discussion. Shalom Aleichem, brothers.
Shalom, brother.
Peace, peace. So let's see. Tonight, let's start with Brother Cedric first. Brother Cedric, your thoughts, brother, kicking off the discussion. How do you feel, or what's your impression of the way the European use religion to conquer the planet? How do they do that, brother?
I'll say they have a strong sense of manipulation with the propaganda and the imagery throughout, which I say they try to attack the mind state of the African individuals as a whole with their certain tactics, using that imagery or terminologies per se about the white Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, because if you look at it, you're talking about African people with thousands of years of history, and then you had these newcomers come over with this white image, and all of a sudden, you know, powerless people. And next thing you know, they're ruling the entire planet. So, yeah, brother, you know, so it's up to us. We can't really get out of this mess unless we understand how we got in this mess in the first place. Brother Uriah, your thoughts?
I think it was one of the best plans they ever put together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is well thought about. This was not something that was just happened. This is something that was really thought about, you know, from Willie Lynch and going even further back than that. That's why part of the history is being erased. Knowing who we really are is just a part of erasing our history, basically using our history. So believe me, this is a thought. It was well thought out. It's something that just happened. So
it wasn't an accident.
Not at all.
Indeed, indeed. Brother Michael, I'm going to switch it up a little bit so we can put this into historical context. When would you say that the European influence, and I know you've written extensively on the subject, when would you say that the European domination of the Hebrew Israelite people actually began from a historical standpoint?
It's a powerful question you asked, and the Spirit just led me to that prior to you asking this question. This is in the book of First Maccabees, and those of us familiar with the book of Maccabees, it's addressing certain things that were revealed today.
You're breaking up a little bit, brother.
I'm sorry. Let me take it off my Bluetooth.
Okay.
I was saying the book of Maccabees, the apocryphal book of Maccabees, captures the invasion of the third beast, the first true European empire, which are the Grecians, led by Alexander, who eventually died. But the Syrian Antiochus Epiphanes came to pretty much power in his stead. And in the book of First Maccabees, chapter 3, verse 46 to 48, it reads something very interesting. It says that Israelites assembled and went to Mizpeh, opposite Jerusalem, because Israel formerly had a place of prayer in Mizpeh. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth, and sprinkled ashes on their heads and rent their clothes. And they opened the books of the law to inquire into those matters about which the Gentiles were painting their images of their idols. So we can go back to pretty much, what is this, the 2nd century of BC, or before the Common Era, and we can see the first true European imperial presence, being the Grecians, starting to whitewash our culture and painting their images and imposing their images over the book of the law, of the Torah, and start from there to pretty much whitewash everything. So this is where I have pinpointed the first true invasion into the Israelite culture of Euro-Gentile, pretty much whitewashing.
Now, is there a difference? Because I was reading the book, The Hebrewisms of West Africa, very excellent book by Joseph Williams, very excellent book for those who haven't read it. And he was making the distinction between the Hellenized Jews, or Hebrews, who were in Kemet in Palestine, versus the ones who were in Babylonia. Do you make that distinction? Was there a difference? Were there some parts of the area or some parts in history where Hellenization was stronger than others, Brother Michael?
I would definitely say so, particularly the regions where the Hellenes themselves, the Greco-Roman cultural hegemonies had taken over. Those regions there. Further east, of course, had been more of the eastern people. Of course, with the Babylonians, Shinar, the Chaldeans, the Persians, they had remained pretty much, of course, they got conquered eventually, but when you're dealing with the Hellenistic Jews, you know, they were the ones who pretty much adopted the Greek culture as well. And even the Greeks who converted to Judaism and maintained the Greek culture. But even when you deal with the diaspora in Babylon and Persia of ancient, they are still dealing with an assimilation as well, because there's many things that Israel adopted in Babylon that were not practiced prior to them going into that captivity for 70 years. So, I mean, the assimilation has always been a problem with Israel, even to the degree where Israel has wanted to be like the Gentiles, you know, in putting a king in their, you know, in their kingdom. So, you know, assimilation has always been an issue with Israel.
Now, I've often read, and I think Dr. John Henry Clark, one of the outstanding scholars in African history, he used to make the point of, he used to always talk about the Greco-Roman period, and he talked about the Greeks, Alexander, weren't as cruel as the Romans, because history teaches us that the Greeks actually were culture vultures. They were into culture. They were involved in all they really wanted to do was spread the Hellenistic ideology throughout the world. But the Romans had no culture. They were straight military. They were brutes. Anybody have any thoughts on that as far as the mentality of the Greeks versus the Romans?
I mean, I could address it real quick. I mean, interesting, when you read Maccabees again, you know, you see the appeal Israel made to deliver them from the Greeks was interestingly to the Romans. So, I mean, I don't, you know, go against Dr. Clark, and, you know, I definitely have a high place of admiration for Dr. Clark and his scholarship. Yet, he doesn't really look at the scriptures as a very credible source, and even at times, you know, speaks contrary to the historicity of scripture. However, when we read books like the Maccabees, and you can see that the Greeks, the Grecian Empire, the third beast itself was very aggressive, and you can get the attestation of that in the book of Daniel. But these people were not like friendly as you may have, you know, been led to believe, especially when Antiochus Epiphanes came to the helm of power as the pretty much the general of that region in which Israel was a part of his dominion. I mean, they were cruel. I mean, they desecrated the temple. They murdered, you know, hundreds of thousands of Israelites, you know, and caused many to flee, and had no respect for the life of men, women, and children, so, and elders, you know. So they were very cruel in their siege of Israel, you know, in the region as well. So, I mean, to say that is to really kind of downplay, you know, just how aggressive Euro culture has been due to its, you know, the way that it has come into history. You know, they came from ice, and it was a very harsh and bitter reality, and they evolved from that, you know. So it's an interesting culture when you really put it all together. Michael Bradley, The Iceman Inheritance, is a book I would really refer to individuals to really get an insight into their origins and see why they are so aggressive in their imperial pursuits.
Yeah, you mentioned Michael Bradley. One of the most interesting points that Michael Bradley makes in The Iceman Inheritance is that he talks about the definition of love from an African a black standpoint, an African standpoint, and a European standpoint. Michael Bradley states in that book that the European definition of love simply means absence of war. It's like a pause, a truce, a temporary truce. So they say that even in male-female relationships, when they say they love each other, that means they're not going to fight for a period of time. So that talks about that warlike behavior. And our African historians have taught us that, several African historians have said that the reason why the European has been so aggressive was because the lack of sunlight, the lack of vegetation in Europe. They didn't have anything. Dr. John Henry Clark called Europe a thawed-out icebox. They didn't have anything, so they had to develop that warlike mentality in order to go take from those who were blessed to have. So that is one rationale why the European was so aggressive. Now, bringing on that same point, and once again, anybody can add on to this, do you all think, from your studies, that there was a difference between the Romans, the Greeks, or that Mediterranean culture and the European from a standpoint? Because some would argue that the Romans and the Greeks weren't really European because of the area, because Europe, of course, hadn't been developed yet as a continent, so to speak, or it was still, in a tribal stage. So do you think the Greco-European mentality differed from the Europeans, the English, the Dutch, and the rest of them that will come later? Do you see a difference, or do you see parallels to their mentality? And that's to anybody.
I'm Caesar silence.
Go ahead, brother.
The only difference is their contact with the continent of Africa. They're closer in proximity, and so they were more, quote unquote, civilized first. So they had Socrates, for instance, who went to Africa and learned of the African, philosophical way, so to speak. But what happens to him when he goes back to, his native country of Greece is that he's murdered, because he's bringing these foreign teachings. And so we see that there's a rejection of a higher consciousness, initially. And of course, after a while, when he taught, Aristotle and his counterpart Plato, you can see that now they're starting to grasp onto these teachings that are foreign to them, and eventually they hijack them and claim them as their own. So the only point of difference that I have come across with their more northern brethren is that, they evolved in consciousness first. But they were still barbarian people. They were still very warlike. They were still very aggressive. They were still very uncultured. They were still uncivilized prior to these points of contact. They were very hedonistic. They were very instinctual. They weren't pretty much into the higher consciousness of being prior to their contact with our ancestors, of the continent. And so, yeah, man, I mean, there's not much of a difference. I think of Darwinism, and how Darwin is describing this evolutionary scale of life. He's describing Europeans in what I have come to understand. He's not really addressing the African origins of humanity. He's addressing how Europeans came into existence, as far as this survival of the fittest and things of that nature. And while that may hold true in aspects of African culture, at the same time, we are a holistic people. We're not, the strong, only the strong survive, because we took care of the weak. We took care of those who were not so strong, so to speak, because we understood the dynamic of communalism, and so, Europeans have a very different construct, and those who have evolved in consciousness have really returned to their genetic origin, so to speak, and that they have really realized the African origin of all civilization.
Indeed. So moving up, we'll jump a couple of centuries, a lot of centuries actually, to the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade, to bring stuff closer to the issue, closer home. It's been reported, and a good book to read, of course, is Dr. Chancellor Williams' book, Destruction of Black Civilization. You can read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa and other sources. But it's really pointed towards the Portuguese in the 15th century, who sent their missionaries into Africa. That was the point where a lot of people point to the fact that began the transatlantic slave trade, but it also began that mental colonization of the mind, the mental side of African people. And that's when they really begin to push the idea of the white Jesus. And of course that would bleed into the Michelangelo and that era. But when you're talking about the Portuguese going into Africa and basically Christianizing them into servitude, that to me is that is the most horrific atrocity in mankind, the transatlantic slave trade. Not only because of the slave trade itself, but the way they use religious imperialism to enforce their will upon African people. So, Brother Cedric, would you agree that the transatlantic slave trade is one of the most horrific things, or the most horrific event in human history?
Yes, sir. I definitely would agree with that. I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. For the aspect of how it took over, and from the planning that they made to decipher the differences and take us over, I feel that overall the atrocity itself was very impactful, and it was a powerful blow to our people, I believe.
Indeed. Brother Uriah, same question. Would you agree that the transatlantic slave trade or the African Holocaust was the most horrific event in the history of mankind?
I definitely think it was. I mean, not only was it physically, but the mental effects of it and applying religion to it, you know, with the symbols and the songs and the hymns and everything else. It was, I mean, the scar to this day still exists. So it definitely had an impact on our people, definitely not in a positive way. You know, the long-term effects, I think, is something that we still deal with today.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Brother Michael, same question.
It's a long, tragic story of which the Holocaust leads to our present plight. You know, it is one of the most heinous crimes committed against humanity, undoubtedly. I mean, if you look in Europe's history, though, and not to take away from it, but they've been barbarous to themselves, you know, as well. They've done the Crusades, I think, of Inquisition. You know, there's some some gross periods of history, but as relates to our existence, you know, that is in human history, you know, undoubtedly, though, cause the continuum of it, the length of time, you know, and the colonization of land, peoples, and the mind is unbridled. It's unparalleled. And I think of Ishaka Musa Verashengo, who talks about, you know, the genocide of European holidays, you know, where even today being Easter, and just like Uriah was saying, the effects of religion on us as a people, we continue to impose these European hollow days in our culture, and not understanding that these have nothing to do with our ancestral cultural lineage, you know. And so you see the colonization and the oppression and the menticide and the genocide that's present from these Holocaust experiences and the vestiges of the Holocaust. So yeah, I mean, if you were to put it up against the other experiences of human tragedy, I would say, though, that the Holocaust, or Ma'afa, is the greatest of those, undoubtedly, just for the length of time and the sheer brutality that we're still experiencing in connection to it.
Now, going back to the psychological aspect and getting really into the topic of the white God complex, what kind of mentality, and you referenced earlier Michael Bradley's book, The Iceman Inheritance, but if we look critically at it, it takes a warped sense of reality to take a God who you consider, who you preach as a God of peace, because that's the aspect of the Creator. They stayed away from the God of vengeance. They talked about a God of peace, a God of love, agape love. That is what they really gravitated towards, that aspect of the Creator's, I guess for lack of a better word, nature. What warped sense of reality does it take to use that concept of God to enslave another people, to murder millions of people, to enslave millions of people? You in some way must not only think that you are God's chosen people, but in a warped sense of reality, I guess you kind of think that you are God yourself, if you can inflict that punishment on a people without fear of retribution. Your thoughts? Anyone?
So true. So true. I mean, it's to the point. It's to the point even through different studies where you have little black kids looking at dolls, and I mean, they're selecting the white dolls as the dolls that are good and the dolls that are bad. It's so embedded and ingrained in our people's brain that, you know, it affects these young kids. You know, it's ridiculous. You know, the thought to be able to kill our brothers and sisters in these streets and, you know, have nobody to answer to. You know, so you believe that you're God. You know, you get 48 hours before you come out with your story and explain what happened. You know, it's just that God complex. So definitely, I mean, it's still here.
Yeah, I mean, because... go ahead, brother.
I was going to say, I think of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and the ISIS papers, the Keys to the Colors, where all of this stems from an inferiority complex that the Europeans have because of the genetic recessive gene that is present with them, and that is compensated by the physical aggression and the violence that they carry out, and also their superiority complex. So if you think of, like, they call it the Napoleon complex with a shorter person, they compensate for that by, you know, extending themselves in other measures to make them feel like they're greater or larger than they actually are. So you think of big cars that people drive, or you know, the guns that they tote, you know, for like a bully who becomes a police officer, you know, they now compensate for the inadequacy that is physically there, or even psychologically there, or spiritually. And so that is what has happened with the European, is that they have taken this inferiority complex of genetic recessiveness and the possibility of genetic annihilation and extinction due to intermarriage and crossbreeding. You know, they are doing whatever they can to ensure their genetic survival. And so you're seeing this play out in so many ways of so-called a God complex, where they're now, you know, controlling the weather. You know, they're, you know, creating robots and saying that, you know, we don't have to reproduce anymore. You know, we can clone people. So, man, it's crazy.
Have any of you ever heard of the concept of Anglo-Zionism?
Yes.
Yeah, there is a teaching that they use called Anglo-Zionism, and it was real strong in Germany as well as Europe to different degrees. They put forth the idea that they were God's chosen people, that they were the true descendants of Israel. It's even been reported by some scholars that the Pilgrims, when they came over with the mentality that they were God's chosen people to civilize the savages, for lack of a better word. So that's one of the things we discuss Jewish Zionism in a lot of forms, but we really don't discuss, as far as most people, we don't discuss Anglo-Zionism and how they came up with the concept that they were God's chosen people. So there's...
May I interject on that point?
Yes, sir.
You take the word British, okay, and you say that this is very powerful. The word British is a combination of two Hebrew words, berit and ish, okay? The word berit means covenant. Ish means man. So what the British, when they say they're British, and they're not English, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
They call themselves British, but what they're saying when they're British is that they are the covenant man. So that Anglo-Zionism is powerful because this is a profession that we are the tribe of Judah, to the degree where the queen today, Elizabeth, is supposed to be sitting on Jacob's pillar that he set up when he had his dream of the ladder on Mount Moriah. So all this you're saying, I mean, it is very rooted in this Anglo-Zionist chosen people mentality that they have, you know, to the degree where they said the sun would never set on Great Britain, you know, on their empire, and they call it the crown, you know, to the degree where even America's law, the bar system, is still under British law. It stands for British Accredited Registry. So you can see the carryover into this whole society in the mentality of this God complex today in so many ways.
Because it's also been reported by historians that the original image on the back of the dollar bill was supposed to be the Exodus story. Has anybody ever heard of that? But that makes sense. If you think that you are the chosen people, that makes sense that you would want to put that image on the back of the dollar bill. From what I've studied, that was the original intent. They wanted to put that on the back of the dollar bill. So
make Hebrew the national language. It was about to be Hebrew in America. So if we would have got to our tongue, that's why they didn't do that. Because they knew that there would be a chance that we can get back to our tongue, but they were going to make Hebrew the national language in America at one time.
So would you all say that they are building off of, as far as their main ideology, if indeed they had studied Hebrew and they were trying to fit themselves into the role of the chosen people, do you think that mostly came from the Torah or the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud?
Talmud, man. It's more Talmudic. That's the legalism that is more present. You know, they can't deal with the covenant because they won't obey it. They're not obedient to it. As far as institutionally, you know, if that was the case, we would be observing Sabbath as an institution within, you know, mainstream America, but they're rebellious. They're Satan's spawn. You know, this is the synagogue of Satan. This is an extension of the synagogue of Satan. And so they're not based in Torah whatsoever. I mean, we wouldn't have the conditions in America if they were Torahatically based. You know, their base is not Torah, so they can kind of deviate from that with the Talmud, because this is exactly what Yahushua was teaching against, is that, you know, you forsake the commandments of the Most High for these teachings and traditions of man. So this is what they're following.
Indeed. Now, moving the conversation to the slave trade in this country, I've always had a question, and even for years, when I began to think critically about the role of Euro-Christianity on the African psyche and how it played out in American history. If you and your enslaved, the people you enslaved are praying to the same God, and you're praying to uphold the institution of slavery, and the slave is praying to get free, which one does God listen to, and how do you work it out theologically? Your thoughts?
Wow.
I mean, I've always been confused with that. I mean, if you're saying you're a Christian, and we all know that America wasn't formed as a quote-unquote Christian nation, it was really formed on, you know, a fake usurping of the role of the chosen people, or in the role of the United States president's deism, where they believe that through enlightenment they could become gods, which is the real basis of, you know, the Constitution and the mentality of George Washington. But but because so many people are bought into, those who weren't are part of that learned class, who bought into the idea of that this is a Christian nation. I just want to get your thoughts on how do you think they could reconcile praying to a God to enslave people, and at the same time having enslaved people praying to the same God to set them free?
You asked a question earlier about Portugal.
Yeah.
And their initial ventures into Africa to enslave people. Well, there's a document that the Vatican ratified with Portugal called Dom Diversas, which means until different. This is under Pope Nicholas V. And they, through the Catholic Church, received the sanction to enslave all quote-unquote savages and to, you know, perpetually enslave them. They would be perpetual slaves. So they received their sanction to do this from the Catholic Church, who pretty much, we know, stands in the stead of God, the Vicar of Christ, you know, vicarious filii Dei, which you equate as 666 when you take that Roman numeral, or the letters and the numeral equivalent gives you 666. But this is where they can get that notion from, that they can carry these heinous acts out because they got sanction and clearance from the Catholic Church to carry out this very edict, this very papal bull even, which is what it was, to enslave our ancestors, you know. But the flip side is they recognize the time as well, because we are in this condition solely because of our disobedience. So they had a window of time to carry out their agenda based on our forsaking the covenant. You see what I'm saying? So there's one point in time that the Most High did not listen to either of our prayers because of our rebellion, you know. And so as we have come into our distress and turned back to the covenant, now the Father is starting to hear our prayers and deliver us from this captivity, you know. So it's a very catchy, tricky situation, but it's dependent on obedience, you know. And repentance, if they repent and truly release these people, from our people from captivity, and restore that which they've taken, there is an opportunity for the Most High to hear their prayers. Redemption is a reality for all. We just have to really be wholehearted and sincere in our seeking to be redeemed.
Indeed. Now, we have, as we approach, I guess we got about 15 minutes left in the show, I wanted to, and we can actually do a whole show on this at a later date, that legacy of the God complex. Want to bring in the evangelical Christian movement as we rapidly move it into modern times. The role of the right-wing evangelical movement, they seem to be, in many ways, carrying on that same ideology, that white supremacist ideology that's wrapped into Christianity, that they are somehow the chosen people. They are somehow, anything they do, whether it be wars, whether it be their business practices, whether it be politics, they believe that God is going to, the Creator, the Most High, is going to smile on their actions, whatever they do. And is their manifest destiny to rule the planet. And I've been studying actually that whole movement. There's a book called The Family by Jeffrey Shiflett, I think the last name is. I have to go back to my library and pull the book. He has a book called The Family. He really breaks down the evangelical Christian movement and how that has been operating as far as ruling the planet, ruling the politics, ruling the social structure of America. So any of you all have any information on evangelical Christian movement and how that plays out as a continuation of Euro-Christianity and the domination of this country especially?
Are they related to the neocons?
Yeah, they're the same family because, it was funny how when President Obama made the comment about, how Christianity has as much blood on its hands as
Islam.
Islam. That was done at the National Prayer Breakfast. And the National Prayer Breakfast was run and created by the evangelical Christian movement. So I thought that was real interesting, that dynamic was happening. So you're talking about the neocons, you're talking about all of them, all operating under evangelical Christian
and they're
movement.
Zionists too. They're very much Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're in support with the Anglo and Ashkenaz Zionist movement. So they look at it like when Jesus Christ returns, he will convert these Jews who do not believe in him to Christianity. But I mean, this is I can see that as a God complex continuum, definitely, because I mean, this is like the pretty much the Jimmy Swaggarts and the what's the TBN or CBN guy's name? Pat Robertson, Jim Hagee, all these individuals who are Billy Graham, very conservative, WASP, preachers. So I mean, but this is also where the Klan has derived from. I mean, these are Klans people, So can't keep that out of the picture as well.
I mean, to cut you off, my brother, but that's something I was thinking as well, like, from the slave boat coming over into the churches to the Klans walking in the churches and using the churches. And then not only that, but using that as a fear tactic when they're burning down the black churches. So even those who conform to that religion is still, being terrorized, even though you were supposed to fall under the same umbrella in a sense, still holding that complex. So it's crazy. It's, to this day, same.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's at some point in the future, Most High we'll come back and we'll do a whole show and really break down the evangelical Christian movement because, and just to throw this out there, their relationship to the Black Power movement is very interesting because according to that book, The Family, they actually, right after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, they set up a pseudo-Black Power group called the Black Buffers in Washington, D.C. as a counter to the Black Power movement. And that's not really talked about, but that's in that book by Jeff Shiflett called The Family. It's very interesting.
That sounds very Hooverish.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they bought, according to the book, they bought them dashikis and everything. They really financed that whole African look, and their purpose was to serve as a counter to the legitimate Black Power movement of the 1968 and the early 70s. So that was real interesting. Okay, as we begin to wind down the show, always want to end with solutions. How do you all think, or what do you all believe would be the solution for us to get our minds back, our spirit back? Because so many of our people, because of the influence of Euro Christianity and Anglo-Zionism, they've thrown away the Bible entirely. They would make the argument that the Bible has no place in Black liberation. So anything you come to them with, even sounding like the Bible, they automatically reject it. And we ask them why. What they basically do is repeat the same European Christianity that they accuse others of following. So how do you all feel about that? How can we begin to break our people out of that idea that the Bible in itself is divorced or separated from our true culture? And we're going around the round table with this.
I believe we have to continue to feed them with the information. Honestly, it's a very difficult task because it even gets personal, close to you, with those who because they've been so brainwashed over a period of time, really don't even give you the opportunity to even hear what you're saying, or even to give themselves a chance to even really question and to think and just see it differently, or give himself a chance. It's just, the long-term effect, it's also generational. Sometimes it's through family. It's what, parents did or grandparents did. It's something that's generational. So, continue to feed with the information is the best that we can do, but it is a difficult task because, it's been a long time since the people have been lost. It's going to take us a little while to try to get, those that you can wake up, but it's definitely a difficult task.
True indeed. Brother Cedric?
Yes, indeed. I would say, following what the brother just said, it definitely is difficult, but at the end of the day, I think somewhat the solution or the methods that we choose to give the information has to be somewhat different, because like you say, with the Christianity and the style that is depicted as right now, is turned, a deaf ear is turned to that. So we definitely have to find some other method to move forward with the information, to change the opinions and the views of our people.
Thank you, brother. Brother Michael, and we'll close with you.
I think people want to see a message more than they want to hear a message. So initially, my thought is we're going to have to demonstrate this culture to them. And this is not just individually, but collectively. So we need to start really looking to have an establishment of viable and functional and legitimate and compassionate and caring institutions. And it doesn't have to be large institutions as far as developing a large, mega church or anything of that nature. But we need to have places where people can come for refuge and people can come to receive these lessons. But we do need to go out into the highways and byways, as I definitely am very commending of you, Minister Paul Scott, for going every first day of the week into the streets and giving out the literature. That is crucial. Those are tickets. Now we need to have a place to bring these people so that we can further their education and further the transformation of their mind by renewing it according to these words and showing them, definitively with power who we are in Yah, and so these are things that I think we have to really work towards. And I think of some brothers in Atlanta, Brother Nasi Yashuvel, who is with Shomrei Torah, as an Israelite. They're doing some very positive things with their community, feeding them, not just with literature, but also like meeting their needs, giving them food, literally, to the community and providing forums for people to come and discuss. So these are things that we need to do. And we're not all going to agree because these are non-messianic. That's a non-messianic group. Of course, we're messianic. But we can still look at some paradigms that these people are using and coalesce with these people to move forward and build a nation. Because this is a nation we're looking to reestablish, you know, a kingdom. And so we have to really look outside of the four walls that we've been doing things and expand. So those are just some of the things that I think that we can really look to do, and not forget the blueprints that our ancestors have laid. Marcus Garvey, even looking at Dr. King and even to Africa with Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie and looking at Lumumba, Joseph Nyerere and Jomo Kenyatta, all these people that we have in our legacy that we can draw this knowledge from, and of course even the scripture. So it's a lot that we can do, man.
True indeed, true indeed. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining in the first episode of the Black Talmidim Takeover on the main Source Network, and Creators Will see you back next week. But we leave you with our closing benediction. Although we have been victimized, yet we are not victims. We are strong African people, and in the fullness of time, in the Creator's will, we shall rise again. As I leave you with peace. Shalom alaikum.
Alaikum shalom.